The ship's already dying when I gave the order to fire, not our ship theirs. A small human vessel, no larger than one of our scout runners, had positioned itself directly in front of my dreadnought. It was not attacking. It was not retreating. It was simply sitting there, between our fleet and their planet, and broadcasting a single looping message on every frequency we used. This is His Ambassador Claire Donovan of the United Earth Council. We would very much like to talk. I am Vrak Zur, Supreme Hunt Commander of the Cathara. I have led the harvest of 41 worlds. I have received the surrender of 11 species. I have watched civilizations older than human history fold and break under the weight of our arrival. Not one of them tried to open a conversation I told my weapon officer to hold, not out of mercy. I want that understood clearly. I held, because I was curious, the way a hunter is curious when prey does something unexpected. Curiosity is not weakness. It is data collection. I opened the channel. The woman on the screen was not what I expected. She was small, even by human standards, with dark hair pulled back and a calm expression that did not match the situation she was in. Her vessel had no shields capable of stopping our weapons, she knew this. And yet she sat there with her hands folded on the desk in front of her and looked directly into the camera as though she were meeting me for tea. Hunt Commander, she said, and she used our title correctly, which meant they had been studying us. We received your fleet's approach signal 14 of your cycles ago. We've had some time to prepare. We'd like to offer you something before this goes any further. You have nothing we want, I told her. Your world has resources your species does not. Step aside. She nodded slowly, not fearfully. The way someone nods when they have anticipated exactly what you are going to say. I understand that's how you see it, she said. But we've reviewed your conquest records, all 41 of them. We found some patterns that concern us, and we think you should hear them before you proceed. I paused. 41 conquests. Our records were not public knowledge. They had gone looking for information about us, and they had found it. I did not yet know how. I filed the detail away. Speak, I said. Every species you've harvested was caught unprepared, she said. Most of them were contacted and overwhelmed within a single planetary cycle. The ones that lasted longer tried to fight conventionally. They matched your tactics and lost because you were simply better at those tactics. That's not a criticism. It's an observation. She tilted her head slightly. We have spent 14 cycles not preparing to fight you conventionally. Silence on the bridge. My officers exchanged looks I chose to ignore. You are one world, I said, one species. Your largest weapons could not breach the outer plating of a single one of our corvettes. That's true, she agreed pleasantly. At the moment. There it was again, that word. At the moment. As though the present conditions were temporary. As though she was already thinking about a version of this conversation that existed in the future after something had changed. I decided then that I would offer them the standard terms, not because I was uncertain, because destroying a species that had done this much research without at least hearing the formal surrender was a waste of data. I will give you 72 cycles, I said. In that time, you will prepare your population for relocation processing and open your resource extraction sites for survey. Any resistance beyond that point will result in planetary denial. I let that phrase sit for a moment. They would know what it meant. We had made certain our history was easy enough to find. Do you understand the terms, Ambassador? Claire Donovan was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the camera. Not at me, precisely, but at whatever she imagined was behind the lens, which happened to be me. And then she said something that I have turned over in my mind every single cycle since that day. Hunt Commander, she said, we were genuinely hoping you wouldn't say that. Not we surrender, not we resist. Not please not a prayer to whatever they prayed to. We were hoping you wouldn't say that, as though they had been running a calculation. And my answer had just closed a door they had preferred to keep open, as though they were not afraid of what came next, as though they were disappointed, in the way that a person is disappointed when a problem they hope to solve peacefully turns out to require a harder solution. I closed the channel. I turned to my second, a veteran commander named Thek, who had served beside me through 9 harvests. Analysis? I said. Thek was quiet for a moment. They are performing confidence, he said finally. The small vessel is a gesture, theater. Prey behavior when cornered can sometimes appear aggressive. I thought about the way Claire Donovan had folded her hands on that desk, the steadiness of her voice, the specificity of her words. Perhaps, I said. But I did not believe it. And Thek knew I did not believe it, and neither of us said anything further. We moved the fleet into standard harvest formation and began our approach to the planet they called Earth. Behind us, the small human vessel turned and flew calmly back toward its world. No distress signal. No emergency broadcast, just a ship returning home with news. I watched it go on the rear display for longer than I should have. I have delivered that ultimatum to 41 species. Every single one of them responded with fear. It came in different forms, some with open weeping, some with rage, some with bargaining, so desperate it was painful to witness. But underneath every response was fear, the plain animal kind, the kind that fills a room and changes the air. Claire Donovan had not been afraid. I told myself it was arrogance. I told myself it was ignorance. I told myself they simply did not understand what was coming. 3,000 years of life, and I was already lying to myself, and I did not yet know it. The planet turned slowly beneath us, blue and white and green, impossibly small against the dark. 72 cycles, I thought. Whatever they were going to do, they had 72 cycles to do it. I almost felt sorry for them, almost. Part 2. The prey that did not run on the 14th cycle of our approach. Commander Thek brought me a report that made no sense. We had been tracking 17 human vessels moving between their planet and its single moon. Supply runs, we assumed. Evacuation preparations, perhaps. Standard behavior. Nothing worth noting. But on the 14th cycle, all 17 vessels simply stopped. They did not land. They did not return to orbit. They stopped. In 17 different positions, spread across a wide arc between the planet and the moon, and then they went dark. Every signal, every emission, every trace, as though they had turned themselves off. A mechanical failure? Thik suggested. 17 simultaneous mechanical failures, I said. Thik did not answer. I ordered our long-range sensors to full sweep and waited. Nothing. The vessels were simply gone from every instrument we had. I gave the order to continue the approach. We had 48 cycles remaining on the ultimatum. There was no urgency. The planet was not going anywhere. But I pulled up the last recorded position of each of those 17 ships, and I kept the coordinates on a secondary screen. I looked at them often. I did not know why. Instinct, maybe. The old kind from before 3,000 years of conquest had made me feel invulnerable. On the 31st cycle, the ultimatum expired. We moved the harvest fleet into low orbit, standard formation, prepared for planetary survey. I gave the signal for the first extraction teams to prepare for descent. Then the 17 ships came back, not to their previous positions. They had moved, silently and without any detectable engine output, into 17 new positions. Positions that formed a precise geometric pattern around our fleet. I had exactly 3 seconds to recognize what the pattern was. It was a firing solution. 17 human vessels opened fire simultaneously, and they did not fire with anything we had cataloged in their known weapons inventory. They fired with something that generated an electromagnetic pulse wide enough to reach across our entire formation. It did not destroy ships, it did not breach hulls, it struck every external sensor array we had and burned them silent. We were not blind. Internal systems stayed operational, but every eye we had pointing outward went dark in the same instant. Evasive, I said, and my voice was calm, and I was proud of that. What followed in the next 400 seconds was unlike anything in 41 harvests. Human vessels came from directions our internal traveling train could not confirm. They moved in patterns that made no tactical sense at first, splitting apart and rejoining, drawing our defensive fire toward empty space, then appearing somewhere else entirely. They did not fight in lines. They did not hold formation. They moved like water around a fist, and every time we struck at them, we struck at nothing. 3 of my escort ships took damage in the first exchange. 1 was fully disabled, 1 Cathara ship. Disabled by humans. I sat very still in my command seat, and I watched and I processed they had planned this. Not the way prey plans, desperate and reactive, but the way a hunter plans, in advance, with patience, accounting for our capabilities and designing their attack specifically around our weaknesses. The electromagnetic strike had not been an accident. They had studied our sensor arrays and found a frequency that would overload them specifically. They knew our array specifications, I said aloud. Thek said very quietly, "Yes, Commander." The word landed between us like something heavy. They had our technical data. Not the general public records Claire Donovan had referenced, actual engineering specifications for our sensor systems, which meant they had sources we did not know about, allies we had not identified, or intelligence networks that had been operating for far longer than 14 cycles, far longer. I ordered a full tactical withdrawal to high orbit and took stock. 6 ships damaged, 1 disabled and eventually recovered. 42 Cathara lives lost in a single engagement with a species that had no warships 300 cycles ago, and they had done it without once fighting us directly, without once meeting our strength with their strength. Every move had been designed to make our strength irrelevant. I called for a full intelligence review of everything we had collected on humanity since initial contact. What came back changed the shape of everything. Humans had not begun preparing when our fleet arrived. The infrastructure we were now seeing, the hidden platforms, the modified vessels, the supply networks between their planet and moon, these things had been built over decades. Long before we found them, they had anticipated contact with a hostile species, and they had prepared for it the way you prepare for something you know is eventually coming, not with panic, but with slow, careful, unglamorous work done over generations. A human named Captain Oliver Wade was commanding the vessel that had led the first strike. We intercepted a fragment of his communication with Earth Command after the engagement. He said first contact achieved as planned, losses within acceptable parameters, moving to Phase 2. Phase 2. They had phases. I pulled every piece of data we had on human history, and I read it myself. Something a hunt commander had never done before, because that was what analysts were for. But I read it myself because I needed to understand something, and I did not trust anyone else's summary. What I found was this: humans had nearly destroyed themselves not once, not twice, but across their entire recorded history, they had come to the edge of extinction multiple times, by disease, by conflict with each other, by changes in their own climate that they had caused themselves, by weapons they had built and almost used. Every single time they had survived. Not because they were physically superior, they were not. Not because they were unified, they were not even now. But because when things became most dangerous, something in them shifted. They stopped arguing about small things, and they turned that energy toward the problem. They became under pressure, more capable than they were without it. They were a species refined by near extinction. Every generation that had survived had passed on something to the next, not a memory, but a posture, a readiness, an awareness, deep in the bones, that the worst thing imaginable was not only possible but likely, and that the only response was to plan for it, build for it, and be ready when it came. We had found 41 species in this galaxy. Most of them had evolved in stable environments. Safety had made them what they were. Safety had also made them fragile in ways they did not know until we arrived. Humans had never had safety. Humans had been forged in the fire of their own vulnerability, and they had learned to love the forge. I called Thick into my private chamber. We underestimated them, I said. I did not make it a question. Yes, he said. By how much? Thick was silent for a long time. I don't know, he said finally. And I could hear in his voice that this uncertainty frightened him. And Thick had served through 9 harvests, and nothing had ever frightened him before. I sent a request to the Inner Armada for reinforcement. In 41 harvests, I had never requested reinforcement. The Armada would take time to respond. In that time, our fleet held position in high orbit, and the humans below us did not celebrate or broadcast or posture. They simply continued preparing for whatever came next. On the 47th cycle since first contact, we intercepted another fragment. Ground communications. Partially encoded, partially open. We were only able to read pieces of it. One piece stayed with me, a human voice, male, calm, speaking to what sounded like a large group. They came here expecting us to be afraid, the voice said. Let's make sure they understand what a mistake that was. And then the sound of a large number of human voices responding together, a sound I had no framework for, because no species we had ever encountered had done such a thing. Somewhere between a shout and a song. I sat with my instruments in the dark of high orbit, and I listened to it long after the transmission ended. Beck found me there an hour later. The reinforcements are responding, he said. 60 additional vessels. Arrival in 200 cycles. Good, I said. Are you concerned, Commander? He asked. The question cost him something. They did not ask such things. Nice. I thought about Claire Donovan's folded hands. About Oliver Wade's phrase, Phase 2. About the sound of human voices coming together in the dark. I am being careful, I said. There is a difference. Theke accepted this and left. But we both knew I was not being entirely honest. Something had changed in me in those 47 cycles, something small but with edges. The certainty I had carried across 3,000 years had developed a crack. I could feel it the way you feel a fault line before it moves, not the movement itself. Just the awareness that the ground was no longer entirely solid beneath you. I had not felt that since I was young, since before I became the thing that other things feared. Part 3. What fear smells like I was conscious before I knew where I was? The ceiling above me was white and smooth, and the air smelled of something faintly clean, like water that had been filtered many times. There were no restraints on my wrists. There were no weapons pointed at me. There was a narrow bed beneath me and a window to my left, showing black space, and on the other side of the room there was a chair, and in the chair sat a human woman looking at me with an expression I could not immediately classify. She was not young, not by human standards. Her hair was gray at the edges, and her eyes had lines at the corners, the kind that came from a long life of looking at difficult things. She wore no uniform, she carried nothing in her hands. She sat with the particular stillness of someone who was comfortable waiting. "You're on a human vessel," she said. "You're not in danger. You have not been harmed." I sat up slowly. My body ached from the engagement. The memory of it came back in pieces. The ambush in the asteroid field at the edge of their inner system. The strike that crippled my personal vessel. The breach team that had come through the hull in silence and taken me before my guards had fully responded. Taken me alive. No species had ever taken a hunt commander alive. "I am Vrak Zur," I said, because saying my name and title aloud was a way of anchoring myself. "Supreme Hunt Commander of the Kethera, I know," she said. "My name is Dr. Nora Calloway. I'm a linguist and a cultural researcher. I've spent the last 9 years studying your species." She paused. "I've been looking forward to meeting you, actually." I stared at her. "Looking forward," I said, to make sure I had translated it correctly. "Very much," she said. "This was not how enemies behaved. This was not how captors behaved." I searched my memory for any cultural framework that fit what was happening, and found nothing. In Kethera practice, a captured enemy commander was either processed or used for information under duress. The idea of a scholar who had spent 9 years studying us, and was pleased to meet me, as though we were colleagues at an academic gathering, had no reference point in anything I had experienced. "What do you want?" I asked. "To talk," she said simply. "You're not being interrogated. You're not being threatened. We have your location blocked from your fleet sensors, so there's no rescue to wait for. But beyond that, you are a guest, a somewhat involuntary one, I admit." "A guest," I repeated. "We can discuss your situation further whenever you're ready," she said. "There's no hurry. You haven't eaten since before the engagement. There's food on the table near the window if you want it. I'll come back in a few hours." She stood, inclined her head slightly, and left. I sat in that room for a long time without moving. Then I looked at the food. It was not Kethara food. It was something prepared for a species with different biology, but whoever had prepared it had done research, because the nutritional components were correct. They had studied our biology well enough to feed us. 9 years, she had said. They had been studying us for 9 years. The war had started from our perspective less than one of those years ago. I ate the food not because I wanted to, because I needed to think clearly, and clarity required fuel, and refusing the food out of pride was something I could not afford. Nora Calloway came back 4 hours later. She brought 2 cups of something warm and set one near me and sat down with the other. "What do you want to know?" I asked her, because if this was going to happen, I would not sit passively through it. "Everything," she said, "but we have time. I'm more interested in what you want to know." I looked at her for a long moment. "Why am I alive?" I said. "Because we don't want you dead," she said. "We've never wanted anyone dead. That's the part your fleet doesn't seem to understand about us. You have been destroying our ships. In defense of our world, yes," she said. "There's a difference between defending something and wanting to destroy something. You came here to take our planet and process our population," we responded. "But the goal was never to destroy the Kethara." She sipped from her cup. "The goal was to make you stop. I absorbed this. It was, from a tactical standpoint, a strange goal. The most efficient way to make an enemy stop was to remove the enemy's capacity to continue. The Kethara understood this well. You believe you can make us stop without defeating us," I said. "I think we might be able to make you understand something," she said, "which is a different thing. And if we don't understand, then the war continues," she said, without any particular emotion in it. "And that will be very unfortunate for both of our species." Something in the way she said it caught my attention. Not a threat, not a boast, a plain statement of probability. The kind of voice a doctor uses when explaining a diagnosis. "Both of our species," I said. "You consider the Kethera's survival relevant?" "Of course," she said, and she looked genuinely puzzled that I would question this. "You are a remarkable species. 40,000 years of spacefaring history. Cultural traditions that go back further than our written language. The loss of all of that would be a tragedy. I had been prepared for many things in this room. I had not been prepared for a human to tell me that the destruction of my species would be a tragedy. Your people are dying," I said, "in the ongoing engagement. Our fleet has pushed past your inner defense line." "I know," she said quietly. "And you sit here and tell me you wish to preserve the Kethara." "Yes," she said. "Does that seem strange to you?" It did. It seemed more than strange. It seemed impossible. It seemed like something a broken mind would say, or a manipulator. But Nora Calloway's eyes were clear and her voice was steady, and she did not look like someone performing a lie. She looked like someone stating a fact she had lived with for a long time. Your species has been nearly destroyed multiple times, I said, because I had read the history, and I wanted to understand if this information changed the look on her face. It did not. Yes, she said. And each time you survived, I said. Yes. How? I asked. And I meant it as a genuine question, not a tactical one. I genuinely wanted to know. Nora Calloway was quiet for a moment. Then she set down her cup and looked at the window and the dark space beyond it. We've always been afraid, she said finally. From the very beginning. Small creatures on a planet full of things that could end us. And being afraid for that long, across that many generations, does something to a species. It makes you pay attention. It makes you care about things, about each other, about the future, about what comes after you. She looked back at me. The Kethara have never been afraid of anything. We are the thing other things fear, I said. I know, she said. And I think that's made you very lonely. The word went through me like a cold current lonely. I had not been asked in 3,000 years whether I was lonely. The question had never arisen. The question should not have been possible. The Kethara were supreme. Supremacy was not lonely. And yet, I thought about the bridge of my dreadnought, the officers who did not speak unless spoken to, the silence between engagements, the way that never asked me how I felt, because such a question would have been inappropriate. The harvests, one after another, no species worthy of being anything other than a resource, no conversation worth having, because there was no one capable of having it. 41 worlds. And in all of that, no one had ever looked at me the way Claire Donovan had from her small ship. No one had ever said, "We were hoping you wouldn't say that," as though they cared about what I chose. I said nothing. Nora Calloway did not push. She came back the next day and the day after that. She brought food and sat in her chair and talked. And she asked me questions, not about fleet deployments or weapons specifications, not once, but about what I thought about things. About what it had been like to command for 3,000 years. About what the Kethara believed. About what I valued. No one asked me what I valued. Not in 3,000 years. I started to answer her questions slowly at first, cautiously, the way you test ice before you step onto it, and then as the days passed more openly. I told her about the early harvests, when I was young, and everything had felt clear and righteous, when I had believed completely that the Kethara were the purpose of the universe, and everything else was scenery. I told her how that clarity had dulled over time without me noticing. I told her about the 42nd species I had never harvested, a small civilization I had surveyed, and then, for the first time, recommended for reclassification rather than extraction, and how the Conclave had accepted my recommendation without comment, and how I had not been able to explain, even to myself, why I had made it. Nora Calloway listened to all of this with her full attention. "What happened to them?" she asked. "The 42nd species." "They continue," I said. "They know nothing of us." "You protected them," she said. "I reclassified them," I said. "It is not the same." "Isn't it?" she said. I thought about that for a long time. Outside the window, the war continued. I could tell from the readings I was not supposed to be able to see, but could. Because Kethara senses are better than humans typically account for, that my fleet was advancing, pushing, taking ground, but the cost was not what it should have been. Every engagement was slower than the last. Every advance cost more than it should have. The humans were not breaking. They were pulling back in some places and holding in others, and every place they held cost us something we could not easily replace. "You are losing," I told Nora one morning. "We're losing territory," she said. "That's not the same thing as losing. Your populations are being displaced," I said. "Yes," she said. And her voice was quiet and steady, and I heard in it the weight of that reality. All those people, all those lives, and she carried the weight without letting it capsize her. We knew it would come to this. We planned for it. "You planned for defeat?" "We planned for the space between the beginning and the end," she said. "We're not at the end." I looked at her and I thought about everything I had read about human history. The plagues they had survived, the conflicts they had ended, the near extinctions they had climbed back from, one after another, not through superior strength, through a refusal, irrational and absolute, to accept that the present moment was the final moment. They did not believe in endings. And I realized, sitting in that quiet room with the stars beyond the window and the war somewhere out in that dark, that this was the thing I had not been able to name when I watched Claire Donovan not be afraid. It was not arrogance. It was not ignorance. It was a belief, tested and refined and unshakable, that things could change, that the worst day was not the last day, that even a species facing something that had never been stopped could find a way. Because humans had always found a way, and they knew it. and that knowledge had become part of what they were. They were not afraid because they had decided not to be. I had never made that decision. The Kethara had never needed to. And something I was only beginning to name with a word that tasted strange in my mind began to stir in me in that room. I was not afraid, I told myself this clearly, but I was something new. Something that had been absent for 3,000 years and was now returning like a tide. I asked Nora Calloway what the word was for the feeling of understanding. That you have not known something important. She thought about it for a moment. Humility, she said. I held the word carefully. I see, I said. And for the first time in a very long time, I meant it. Part 4. The long, terrible reckoning they sent me home in a prisoner exchange. 231 Kether personnel for me alone. I was aware of what that ratio meant. I was aware of what I had cost them, not in resources, but in what they had given away by taking me in the first place. A significant strategic advantage, given up because they had decided that holding me had accomplished what they needed it to accomplish. Nora Calloway was there when they transferred me. She stood on the dock of the exchange station with her hands in her coat pockets, and she said, "Take care of yourself, Commander." I did not know what to say to that. So I said, "Thank you for the food." She smiled, the particular kind that humans produced when something small moved them. "You're welcome." That was the last time I saw her. The ship that returned me to the Inner Armada was quiet the entire journey. No one asked me what had happened. No one asked what the humans had said or what I had told them. The officers around me looked at the floor and the walls and each other, but not at me, and I understood that my capture had changed things. A hunt commander who had been held by prey, who had accepted their food, and spent weeks in conversation with one of them, was not the same object as the hunt commander they had known before. I was changed and they could see it, and it made them uncomfortable. I did not try to reassure them. I read the war reports on the journey. All 230 cycles of engagement data, studied in sequence, and the picture that emerged was clear to me in a way that I suspected it was not clear to the analysts who had compiled it. We were winning on paper. We held 60% of the contested systems. We had pushed the human defense line back to within 4 light cycles of their home system. By every metric the Conclave used to evaluate a harvest operation, we were succeeding, but the cost curve was wrong. In a standard harvest, the cost of engagement decreased as the operation progressed. Early resistance spent itself, and later stages became easier as the target species' capacity degraded. In every one of our 41 previous harvests, the graph of resource expenditure looked like a slope going down. In the human engagement, it looked like a slope going up. Every cycle of war cost us more than the one before it. Not because they were gaining strength in the conventional sense. They were losing ships, losing systems, losing population centers. But each loss seemed to produce a response that was more precisely targeted, more efficiently executed, more difficult to counter than the one before it. They were learning. Not just learning from their mistakes, learning from ours. Each engagement gave them data about our tactics, our response patterns, our decision-making under pressure, and they fed that data back into the next engagement in ways that we had not anticipated. They were treating the war itself as a research project. I presented my full analysis to the High Conclave 10 cycles after my return. The Conclave Chamber was a place I had addressed many times across 3,000 years. A vast circular room, dark at the edges, with the 9 Conclave Masters positioned at the inner ring, and the light falling only on the speaker at the center. I had stood in that light and delivered the harvest results for 41 worlds and felt nothing but the clean satisfaction of a mission complete. I stood in that light now and felt something different. I told them everything. The electromagnetic ambush, the phase system, the intelligence network that had given them our technical specifications before the war began. Nora Calloway and what she had told me, and more importantly, what I had concluded from it, the cost curve, the trajectory. I told them that in my assessment, continuing the harvest on current terms would consume the Inner Armada within 400 cycles and achieve nothing but a mutual degradation that benefited no one. I told them we should negotiate. The chamber was very quiet when I finished. Master Vethor, the eldest of the 9, spoke first. The commander has been among the humans for a significant period, he said. It is not uncommon for extended contact with prey to create a distortion in perspective. I am not distorted, I said. I am reporting an analysis based on objective data. The cost curve is not a matter of interpretation. The cost curve reflects an enemy in a final defensive phase, said Master Cortel, who had never led a harvest operation and built his entire career on strategic theory. Prey always fights hardest when cornered. It does not mean they are capable of sustained resistance. They have sustained resistance for 230 cycles, I said. I have led 41 harvests. No species has offered more than 30. Then this will be the 42nd, Vethora said. And it will end the same way. I thought about that number 42, the species I had reclassified, the one that continued somewhere knowing nothing of us. There is another consideration, I said. I had saved this piece for last because I knew it would be the most difficult. In the course of reviewing the intelligence that suggests they had access to our technical specifications, I identified 17 separate species in the surrounding systems who have received contact from human diplomatic representatives in the past 60 cycles. Silence. 17, I said again. Species we harvested, displaced, or bypassed. Species that have reason to align against us. The humans have been conducting outreach operations throughout this region of the galaxy for longer than the war has been running. They have not been fighting us while bleeding. They have been fighting us while building. Master Cortel made a sound that in Kethara culture communicated dismissal. 17 species with no significant military capacity. Individually, I said. No, the Conclave received this without visible reaction, but I had been in politics long enough to read the stillness. They were troubled. They were concealing it, as we always concealed such things, but it was there. Vethora deliberated for a moment that stretched. The Conclave will consider your report, he said finally. In the meantime, the Scorched Spiral operation will proceed as planned. Scorched Spiral. The plan that had been drafted before my return. I gathered a full annihilation strike on the human home system. Not a harvest, not a relocation, a removal. Every installation, every vessel, the planet itself left uninhabitable. That will not achieve what you intend, I said, very carefully. It will end the engagement, Vethor said. It will end this engagement, I said. And begin a different one. Against whatever coalition they have assembled. Against every species in this region that now knows we will erase rather than harvest when pressed. The political consequence alone. The Conclave has rendered its decision. Hunt, Commander, Vethora said, and in his voice was the edge that meant the conversation was finished. I left the chamber that found me in the corridor outside. I heard the result, he said. Yes, I said. Do you believe it will go the way you described? He asked. I looked at him for a long moment. Vek, who had served beside me through 9 harvests. Vek, who had been frightened for the first time in his life in orbit above the human world and had trusted me enough to show it. I believe, I said, that we are about to make the largest mistake in the history of our species. Vek said nothing. Prepare your crew, I said. We will follow the operation. But I want full sensor coverage on every system within range. If what I think is coming, I want to know the moment it begins. The Scorched Spiral fleet assembled over the following 40 cycles. It was enormous, the largest combined force the Kethara had put together in 2,000 years. 112 vessels, armed for total planetary denial, pointed toward the human home system like a single enormous fist. I thought about Claire Donovan, watching it from wherever she was. I thought about her saying, "We were hoping you wouldn't say that." I wondered if they had hoped we wouldn't do this either. I wondered if they had a plan for when we did. We crossed into the human home system and found it empty, not damaged, not evacuated in the chaotic last-minute wakes of a species caught off guard, empty in the way of something carefully, deliberately vacated. The orbital installations were intact but powered down. The planetary surface showed signs of recent habitation, but no current population. The comm networks were silent. Where are they? The fleet admiral, a Kethara named Preth, asked over the command channel. I already knew where they were. I had known from the moment the sensors showed me an empty planet. I checked my secondary display. The 17 ship positions from the early engagement were still there in my memory, a habit I had never broken. I looked at the sensor data from the surrounding systems. Admiral, I said, I recommend immediate evasive. They came from 17 directions simultaneously, not 17 ships. 17 fleets, human vessels, yes, but also others. I recognized 3 species. I had personally overseen the harvest of operating equipment that had not existed when we encountered them, equipment clearly built with significant outside assistance. I recognized 2 species we had bypassed as insufficiently resourced. I recognized 1 species I had reclassified, the ones I had let alone, and they were there too, and their ships were unlike anything in our catalog. All of them together, coordinated with a precision that should have been impossible across that many separate cultures and military traditions. They had unified them. Every species that had reason to fight us and had been told it could not be done alone, gathered into a single force, positioned and prepared and waiting for exactly this moment. And at the center of the human formation, transmitting on every frequency we used, was a single human vessel. A voice came through on the command channel. A male voice, calm and clear. "This is Captain Oliver Wade of Earth Command," it said. "Fleet Admiral Preth, you are surrounded and outgunned. We are not asking for your surrender. We are asking for your commanders to come to the table. The same table we offered at the beginning." Preth's response was to open fire. I watched what happened next from my ship at the edge of the formation, and I will not describe it in detail, because there is no honor in it for any of us. The Kethera fought because the Kethera do not know how to stop. Preth fought because pride would not permit him to do anything else. The Inner Armada had been fighting humans for 230 cycles. They had been fighting everyone else for 40,000 years. But everyone else had been waiting and preparing and learning from the humans how to fight in a way that made our strength irrelevant. It did not take long. When it was over, 2/3 of the scorched spiral fleet was disabled or retreating. Preth was among the lost. The Conclave was informed within the hour, and I was told that 3 of the 9 masters had entered a period of silent isolation, which in Kithara culture was as close as we came to acknowledging that something fundamental had broken. I sat in my command chair for a very long time, then I opened a channel to the human fleet. "This is Vraxer," I said. "I am requesting to speak with Captain Wade." There was a pause, then a voice said, "Commander, we were hoping you'd make that call." The same words, different meaning now. A door opening instead of a door closing. I closed my eyes for just a moment. "Put me through," I said. Part 5, the shape of a new galaxy. The war ended the way most things end, not with a single moment. Not with a ceremony grand enough to match what had been lost and won. It ended in pieces, over many cycles. As the remaining Kithara fleet commanders, one by one accepted the reality that the Conclave could no longer sustain the campaign, and opened separate communications with the alliance that had assembled against us. I was part of none of those negotiations. I was sent home, not in disgrace, not in honor, simply sent home, because once the primary engagement was over, I was a retired commander without a fleet, and there was nothing immediate for me to do, except wait and watch and wonder what came next. I went back to the Conclave homeworld, and I walked through its great halls, and I tried to understand what it felt like to be on the other side of everything I had spent 3,000 years becoming. The Conclave was not dissolved immediately. That took another 40 cycles of negotiation, during which I read every document produced by the Alliance talks and said nothing publicly. The new framework that emerged was not a conquest. It was not even, in any strict sense, a defeat. It was a restructuring, the kind that only becomes possible when one party in a conflict has been comprehensively outmaneuvered and knows it, and the other party is too strange and too principled to press the advantage the way any sane species would. The humans offered the Kethera a seat on the Reparations Council, a seat on the council designed to address the harm the Kethera had done to 41 other species. I read this, and I sat down slowly, and I stayed sitting for a long time. Nora Calloway came to find me. I did not know she would come. I had not sent any communication. But she arrived on the homeworld in a small transport vessel on a gray morning when the clouds sat low over the old Conclave towers, and she sent a simple message to the address I was using. "I'm here. Do you want to talk?" I met her in a courtyard that had once been the gathering place of hunt commanders before great campaigns. The stone was old and dark, and the wind moved through the empty space, where thousands of Kethara had once stood with certainty and purpose. She looked older than the last time I had seen her. Humans aged quickly in the way that things burned quickly, producing light and warmth at the cost of duration. She had more gray in her hair and more lines at the corners of her eyes, and she walked with a slight favoring of her left side that had not been there before. "You were injured?" I asked. "A long time ago," she said, "the war. I was on a station when it was hit." She said it without self-pity, the way she said everything, as a plain fact that deserved acknowledgement, but not elaboration. We sat on the old stone steps, and the wind moved through the empty courtyard. "How many of your species did we lose?" I asked. I had read the estimates. I wanted to hear her say the number. She said it. I received it without flinching, because flinching would have been too small a response. "And the other species in the Alliance?" I asked. She said those numbers too. The total settled on the courtyard like something physical, like a weight the stone itself had to bear. "I am sorry," I said. Nora Calloway looked at me for a moment. "I know," she said. "Does that matter?" I asked, and I meant it as a genuine question. I did not know if Kethra remorse was a currency anyone in the galaxy would accept. I did not know if I had the right to offer it. "It matters," she said, "not in the way it replaces what was lost. Nothing replaces that. But it matters because it means you understand what happened. And understanding is the beginning of everything else." Everything else. I repeated. The Reparations Council. Partly, she said, but also just the next 40,000 years. However they go, I looked at the empty courtyard, the stone worn smooth by the feet of commanders who would hold no more campaigns. The towers where the conclave had deliberated choices that had unmade worlds. The seat on the council, I said. Is that your idea? Oliver Wade's, actually, she said. You remember him. He ended the final engagement, I said. He also argued for 30 cycles that the Kethara should have representation in whatever came next, she said. It wasn't a popular position. A lot of people wanted exclusion at minimum. Some wanted worse, she paused. He kept saying that if you leave a species out of the process doesn't last. I thought about Oliver Wade, whose voice I had heard on the command channel during the worst moment of my people's history. Calm and clear and offering a table. A man who had fought us and then turned around and argued for our seat at the council. Why? I asked. Not about Wade specifically, about all of it. About the ambassador who had not been afraid, and the linguist who had brought me food, and the captain who had fought us, and then argued for our dignity, and every human decision in between that I still could not fully map onto any framework I had for how intelligent species behaved. Nora was quiet for a moment. We believe everyone can change, she said finally. It's possibly the most irrational thing about us. Nothing in our history justifies it. We've been betrayed more times than I can count, by other humans, by circumstances, by our own best intentions. And we still believe it. She looked at me. Maybe because we've needed people to believe it about us. We've done terrible things too, Vraxer. Not to you, to each other. And there were people who believed we could be different. And because they believed it, we had something to grow toward. I thought about the 42nd species. The one I had let alone, because something in me that day in that survey report had made a decision I could not then explain. I thought about Thek, who had shown me he was frightened because he trusted me to receive it. I thought about 3,000 years of certainty and how hollow it had been at the center. How much of my life had been the grand external motion of conquest, with a silence underneath it that I had never known how to fill. You will take the seat? Nora asked. I have not been offered it, I said. You're being consulted first, she said. We felt it was more respectful than simply assigning it. I considered the logic of that for a moment. Asking the Kethara Hunt Commander if he was willing to accept a position on a council established to address what the Kethara had done. Consulting him rather than directing him. Extending, even here, even after everything, the same hand that Claire Donovan had extended from a small ship in front of my dreadnought. They had never stopped extending the hand. Across the entire war, through every engagement and every loss, they had never stopped believing that the hand was the right thing to offer. I thought this was either the most profound or the most impractical thing I had ever witnessed in 3,000 years, and I was no longer certain there was a difference. What would the seat require? I said. Presence at the council sessions, she said. Testimony about the harvested species, records we don't have access to about their conditions before and after contact. And over time, participation in whatever frameworks we build for ensuring it doesn't happen again. Ensuring the Kethara do not harvest again, I said. Ensuring no species harvests another, she said. Including us, we're not exempting ourselves from oversight. We've done enough damage to each other to know we need it. This was the thing that stopped me. Not the council. Not the testimony. This, we're not exempting ourselves from oversight. I tried to imagine any Kethara conclave master saying those words and placing themselves genuinely under external review. I could not construct the image. Our entire civilization had been built on the premise that we answered to nothing. And no one. Because we were the highest, the most capable, the rightful shapers of galactic order. The humans had beaten us, and their first instinct was to make sure they could be checked. I did not have a framework for this. I was beginning to think I needed one. I will take the seat, I said. Nora nodded. She did not celebrate or thank me. She nodded the way someone nods when a long process reaches a necessary step. The first session is in 60 cycles, she said. On the station they're calling New Meridian. We'll send you the coordinates. I know the coordinates, I said. It is in a system we surveyed 30 cycles ago and declined to harvest. She looked at me. We declined to harvest it, I said, because the species there was small and had no strategic value. We did not bother, I paused. They have value. They do, she said softly. The wind moved through the courtyard again. Somewhere in the towers, a bird native to this world was making a sound, a small, persistent sound, indifferent to the weight of everything that had happened in this place. Nora, I said, her given name for the first time. She did not remark on it. Yes? In the session on my ship, I said, when you told me the Kethara fear nothing, and that it must be lonely. I looked at the empty towers. You were right. She said nothing. She did not say I told you so, or I know, or any of the things that a person might say when a truth they offered long ago is finally accepted. She simply sat with it, the way she sat with everything, with the full weight of her attention. I am trying to learn something, I said. I am not certain I have the capacity for it. We are not built for the kind of awareness you are describing. Our neurology, our culture, 3,000 years of my own habits of thought. I paused. I am not certain I can become something different. You don't have to become something different, she said. You just have to show up. I looked at her. That's the whole secret, she said. And there was something in her voice that I recognized after all this time. As the particular gentleness humans produced when they were speaking from experience rather than theory. You just show up. To the council, to the conversations, to the things that are uncomfortable. You don't have to be transformed. You just have to be present. I thought about the first session. 42 species in some configuration or another assembled in a room, former prey of the Cathara in many cases. And me in my seat, the only one of my kind. The thought produced something in me, not fear. The Cathara did not produce fear, but something adjacent to it. Something that involved the future being uncertain in a way I could not control. I had not felt that in 3,000 years. I had always been the thing that made others feel it. I filed the sensation carefully. I wanted to remember what it felt like. Thank you, I said to Nora Calloway, for the second time in my life. You're welcome, she said again. And again, the small human smile. She left the next morning on her transport vessel. I stayed in the courtyard until the clouds broke and the light came through. 60 cycles was enough time to prepare, to review the records of every species we had harvested, every world we had taken, to assemble everything I knew and everything I had access to into the most comprehensive accounting I could manage. I would not go to that council empty-handed. I would not make them pull the record from me the way they had to pull everything from us. I would bring it willingly, the way Claire Donovan had extended her hand willingly, because I had finally understood what the gesture was. It was not weakness. It had never been weakness. It was the choice that only a secure creature could make. The choice to offer something rather than demand it. The choice to acknowledge what you carried rather than pretend the weight wasn't there. The Cathara had carried 40,000 years of actions across this galaxy, and for 40,000 years we had called it glory. I was going to call it something else now, something more accurate. And then I was going to show up. The bird was still calling from the tower, its small, persistent sound filling the empty courtyard, unbothered by history, unconcerned with the shape of what came before or after. I listened to it for a while. Then I went inside and began my work. We had feared nothing for 40,000 years. I understand now what that cost us. The thing you cannot fear, you cannot respect. The thing you cannot respect, you cannot truly know. And the thing you do not know will eventually surprise you in the dark in ways you are not prepared for. The humans feared everything from the very beginning, and it made them pay attention. And paying attention made them understand. And understanding made them, when the moment came, capable of something we had never managed in 400 centuries of dominance. It made them choose. Every moment of that war, from Claire Donovan's folded hands to Oliver Wade's open channel, they were choosing. Choosing to offer a hand instead of a weapon. Choosing to rebuild instead of retaliate. Choosing to believe that even the thing that had tried to erase them was worth bringing to the table. I do not know if the galaxy will become what they believe it can be. I do not know if I am capable of the things that Seat will ask of me. But I showed up to that courtyard when Nora Calloway sent her message. And I will show up to the council in 60 cycles, and I will show up the cycle after that. It is the whole secret, she said. I am beginning to believe her.